So this week we're going to be going through chapter 3 and chapter 4. It's covering a lot, but the two chapters are actually connected because both of them are dealing with operant conditioning. So in chapter 2 we talked about classical conditioning, and the idea of classical conditioning is our behavior is the result of our environment. It's the result of the stimuli that occurred before our behavior. So the thought is, okay, we have some kind of context, a stimuli, and that leads us to behave in certain ways. So it's like a reflex. And in chapters 3 and 4, we're going to talk about, well, the way we behave changes our environment. So the way we interact with people makes them, interact with us differently. And then the way they interact with us leads us to interact with them differently. And so there's an ongoing cycle that we have an effect on the environment around us. So that's what this chapter is going to start dealing with. What are the effects of our behavior? And the chapter 3 actually has two main theorists that we're going to talk about, Edward Thorndike and then Clark Hull. And so for this video, I'm just going to talk through Edward Thorndike's view. And so let me give you a little bit of a background on Thorndike. So he was the son of a minister and had a fairly strict upbringing. So there's a real emphasis on hard work and good manners. He started off as an English major, but then switched over to psychology at Harvard. He tried to establish through experimentation that animals learn through a gradual process of trial and error, and that each trial leads to the stamping in of a particular behavior. I'll explain what I mean in a little bit. And one of the areas that you should know that Thorndike had a big impact was on the field of educational psychology. So the idea that we should do testing, so you can thank him or blame him for the things like standardized testing, SAT scores, things like that. So his most famous experiment was a puzzle box. He devised these kind of puzzle boxes, and so it's kind of interesting that he was a bit of an engineer, and so he would devise these puzzle boxes, and then he would place cats inside, and there would be some sort of a reward, like a fish that was outside of the box, and so the cat's going to be motivated to get out of it. First off, cats don't like being trapped in boxes usually, and then if they're hungry, they're going to want to get the treat. And his question was, how do these cats learn to escape? Do they have some moment of insight where they realize, oh, I know how to get out of here. I need to, pull this lever, push this, or did he, or did the cats actually use trial and error to escape? And so this is kind of what it looks like. I encourage you to watch the video. There's a short video, just about a minute, that shows a puzzle box and shows what it actually did. Again, there's sort of a string it has to grab onto and push, a lever that it has to operate, and then that releases the door so that the cat can come out. And what Thorndike found is that cats did not show any evidence of higher level reasoning. They didn't have any sort of insight and realization that, oh, I know how to solve this. The cat instead just makes a number of responses. It does a bunch of behaviors. It tries a bunch of things out. And what it finds is that some of the behaviors gradually leads to the solution. And what the cat tends to do is it behaves in the manner that preceded the satisfying state of affairs, which is escape from the box. So there wasn't a pattern of the cat just looking around and then realizing, oh, I know how to get out of here. Instead, it seems to gradually get to the point where it realizes how to escape. So A typical cat, this is just one example, might look like this graph. So this is in trial 1, and it took this cat about 160 seconds to be able to escape from the puzzle box on trial 1. In trial 2, it was about 30 seconds or so. Trial 3, it was 80 seconds, and trial 4 and trial 5. And then it gradually gets to the point where it clearly has demonstrated that it knows how to escape from the puzzle box. So what he pointed out is that this curve, it generally starts off really steeply declining and then flattening out at the end, meaning that there's a pattern whereby it's steep, so that there's a learning process, but it's not like it's all or nothing. It's not like the cat tries this a few times and then suddenly figures it out. It's more of a gradual process. So from his research, he started developing some laws. In psychology today, we don't really talk about laws of behavior, but at that time, again, they were trying to really argue that psychology is a science, and so in other fields of science, they talk about laws like the laws of thermodynamics and different ones like that. And so what Thorndike was thinking is, what if we develop some laws of behavior and learning? So the Thorndike argued that learning consists of forming bonds between stimuli and responses, and that these bonds take the form of neural connections. He thought that there's something changing in the brain that when these bonds are formed, and that the stimuli response connections, he believed that they actually get stamped in a way that if they lead to a satisfying state of affairs, which was how Thorndike explained it, then the stimulus response connection would get stronger. If it didn't lead to a satisfying state of affairs, then or if it was forgotten, that would be the stamping out of connections. So Thorndike, the way he was thinking about it is that he said, when we learn, we're learning that in a certain context, we behave a certain way. So we're learning the connection between a response, a stimuli and a response. It wasn't necessarily that we are learning that, oh, if I act this way, then I get this reward. It's instead that the consequence will strengthen this relationship. So if it is a good consequence, then you're gonna, in this context, behave this way. If it is a bad consequence, then when I'm in this context, I'm not going to behave this way. All right. So okay. So what were the laws that he came up with? The first law was what he called the law of exercise. So basically, he believed that if we want to strengthen stimuli response connections, we need to do so frequently, vigorously, recently. That you just need to drill. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because at first it was the center of his theory, but then gradually he basically almost took it out and argued that it was a minor part of the learning process. But because Thorndike had a big influence on educational psychology, some schools really started working at drill approaches to learning, that what we need to do is exercise children in terms of their mental skills. So just over and over and over, get them to do math problems, science problems, things like that. And that's because Thorndike argued that exercise and repetition was really important. The second law is the law of effect, and it argues that learning is shaped by the consequences of the behavior in the past. So um, if the if you do something and then following that behavior, there's generally a satisfying state of affairs, then you're more likely to do it again. If you do something, and here again, we're calling these responses, but when we say responses, we just mean behavior, anything that you can do, from smiling to studying to eating, whatever it is, any kind of behavior. Uh, so if the behavior leads to a satisfying state of affairs, you're more likely to do that behavior again. If the behavior leads to an annoying state of affairs, you're less likely to do it again. This ends up being Thorndike's most important law. And I'm just going to give you a hint because you're probably starting to think that you've heard this before. This is really a predecessor of B.F. Skinner, who argued that for the idea of reinforcers and punishers. So the process of reinforcement and punishment. So if it sounds like that, Skinner rethinks it a little bit, but this is basically the same idea. Okay, so this law of effect, when you have people who are really emphasizing, stimuli and responses, the struggle that they had as behaviorists was to try to explain that without talking about what happens in the mind. So they have a little bit of a circular explanation. So Thorndike said it is a satisfying state of affairs if the organism doesn't try to end it or tries to maintain it. So if my behavior leads to a situation that I don't try to end and that perhaps I even try to maintain, that is the definition of a satisfying state of affairs. If I try to end, if my behavior leads to something that I no longer want to be a part of, so if I do something and suddenly people are, laughing at me, because I don't want them to laugh at me, because I would try to stop them from laughing at me, I might, we can consider that an annoying state of affairs. So from a behaviorist perspective, and again, the behaviorist would not say, oh, it's satisfying because it makes me happy, or it's annoying because it makes me frustrated. They basically say it's these state of affairs is defined as, by the attempts that the person or the animal makes in terms of continuing the behavior, continuing the situation, or ending the situation. All right, so the third major law that Thorndike introduced was the law of readiness. Sorry about that. This one's an important one because when we think about like the educational context, I've actually taught statistics quite a few times. I teach data analysis now, and I find that some students struggle. Maybe if you've taken it, maybe you find that it's a difficult class. But some of those students will come around and want to do our master's in research psychology program. And so it's really interesting because when they take statistics or data analysis, sometimes they really struggle. Sometimes they do very mediocre, so a C, C+. But when they get to the master's program, they're learning about research, they're engaged in a research project, and it's remarkable that they suddenly have a greater readiness to learn about statistics and data analysis, and they do much better once that time comes around. So they struggled before, but maybe it wasn't about whether they were capable of learning it, but instead, what if it had to do with whether they're ready and prepared to do it. If they didn't see relevance to what they were learning, if they didn't see any kind of application, then maybe they weren't actually ready for and motivated to learn. And maybe that was the real explanation for why they struggled. So, according to Thorndike, readiness is very much related to the learner's maturation and previous learning, um, and whether they find an activity satisfying or annoying. So, basically, Thorndike argued that if the learner is in a pleasant state of affairs, they're going to be ready to learn. And if they are instead forced to learn when they're not ready, or prevented from learning when they are ready, that's actually going to lead to an annoying state of affairs. Again, I think this is an important thing when you're taking classes, even this class. If you think of this as like, oh, it's just drudgery, it's just some facts, and it's just things that I have to memorize, you might not actually be motivated to learn this. But and you might not do well. But if you came back to this class, so if that were to be you, but then in 5 years you are working in the mental health field, you realize that you work with people with anxiety problems, with addictions, with phobias and trauma, and you start realizing, oh, you know, I don't have all the tools that I need. I don't really understand how to help people with these kind of conditions. And let's say you came back to this class, I think you would do really well in this class at that point, because you'd be suddenly motivated to learn, because this class actually has a lot to do with anxiety treatment, addiction treatment, and just clinical work as a whole, and as well as like how to educate people. So so again, I encourage you to think about this class as preparing you for some really important stuff, because you don't want to take it again in the future, right? All right, now Thorndike introduced another important idea, which is the theory of identical elements. So if you learn something, if you learn to connect some stimulus and a response, what Thorndike argued is that it can extend to another stimulus, but only to the extent that the new stimulus has identical elements. So if you were to, trying to think of a good example, if you're learning a software program, and the software program has drop-down menus, it has point and click, and it's basically got a familiar interface. If you learn how to interact with that software program and get really good at it, you're going to be better equipped to do a different software program, as long as the new software program has similar elements. It doesn't have to be exactly identical, but the more similar it is, the more likely you'll have a transfer of what you learn. And the important part of this is that for transfer of learning to occur, there needs to be some sort of elements that needs to be similar. And that's important because prior to Thorndike, a lot of classical views of learning emphasize that things like reasoning, attention, judgment, memory, that they are kind of like a muscle, and if you exercise it, it gets stronger. And so if you were to study Latin, the thought that was that the Latin is going to exercise your judgment and reasoning and memory, and then that would equip you to be able to do math more readily, or engineering more readily, or whatever it might be. So the reality, though, is that the classical model of education, I won't quite say that it's been completely debunked, but it's been mostly debunked. Um, Trying to develop critical thinking skills, it you need to develop them in particular contexts, and they're not necessarily going to transfer across really different subjects. So if you study history and learn how to critically engage history, the fact is that might not equip you very well to learning how to do critical reasoning in psychology. There's enough differences there that it doesn't transfer. So the critical reasoning process has to be a little bit more specific to whatever topic you're dealing with. Okay, now so Thorndike, uh, his main takeaway was that learning is a process of trial and error. He found that cats showed no ability to imitate and no ability for insight. Um, Even if they observed another cat, that had no impact on how long it took them to complete the puzzle. So each cat really had to figure out the problems on their own. And this is interesting, even if you physically move their paws, that didn't help them learn. And so they actually had to manipulate things of their own activity, and that was what actually would help them learn how to escape. Now, Thorndike, and this happened a few times, I'll try to point it out. He actually may have overstated the case a little bit, because more recent research has shown animals are in fact capable of imitation. But again, what Thorndike found is that the emphasis on insight might be overstating things. So Thorndike actually believed people, like cats, generally learn using trial and error. So Thorndike, his thinking was that, well, people are a animal. People are a type of animal, and that because we are a type of animal, we're going to use the same learning processes that animals do. He thought we were, obviously capable of greater amounts of learning, but that we use the same mechanism, trial and error. And again, that also seems to not be the case, that people do seem to learn through insight, not just trial and error. But I hinted at this before. Thorndike revised his theory. And again, this is important when we think about science. Science is never final. So it's a process. And his later theory was really emphasized reinforcement. And so there's a few things that he changed with his later theory. The first thing was the repeal of the law of exercise. So he said what he found was that if you exercise, if you do things repeatedly, but there's no consequences, then there's no learning that's going to occur. So if you do things over and over and over and over again, oftentimes this idea of like, just do it over and over and they'll start learning. He found that that wasn't the case. He also, and I'll explain each of these in a minute, he also said that the law of effect, he took half of it, and I'll explain that in a second. He argued for learning by ideas and started recognizing that cognitions are important. He talked about the principle of belongingness. Again, that's a cognitive component. And then he talked about spread of effects. So I'll talk you through each of these. Okay, so the first one was repeal of law of exercise. So he did a study where people would draw a single line and their eyes were closed throughout the process. So when your eyes are closed, you don't have any consequence. You cannot see, you'll do these little short lines, but you don't necessarily know how long of a line you're drawing, and you can't compare them all. So you have no feedback on your performance. And when he did that, he found that there was no, they didn't develop accuracy in regards to how long of a line they drew. So they were trying to draw a line 4 inches long, but they would do this over and over and over and over again, and without, and it's really important to say, without any feedback about their performance, just like, again, visually seeing the line, they never actually learned anything. And that's why he said, well, okay, exercise on its own isn't a factor in learning. There you go. Now, he also said that there's the law of effect. So arguing that the influence of 2 consecutive rights or wrongs he looked at the influence of 2 consecutive rights or 2 consecutive wrongs on the next choice of a possible word meaning for an unknown word for 9 subjects in 6 experiments. Okay, so he is trying to see, do we learn when we're told that we're wrong? And what he found is that if we were told that we were wrong, that didn't change whether we chose the meaning again. So if okay, so there's an unknown word, basically a made-up word, and he is having them choose possible meanings, and there's a right answer, but the participants don't know what the right answer is. And so he is studying and saying, okay, what happens if we tell them they're right? Well, if you tell them they're right, they're probably going to make that same choice the next time they're presented with that unknown word, that new made-up word. They're going to say, oh, here's what it means. It means to try a long time. Okay, the next time they approach that word, they're going to say, oh, to try a long time. They're going to remember that they were told they were right. But if they're told they were wrong, they're looking at a word and they're saying, oh, I don't know what the definition is. I'm going to pick this one, that it's a orange bird. Well, the experimenter will tell them that's wrong, but the next time they are faced with that same unknown word, they might pick that same choice again, the orange bird, and they would be wrong again. So what he took away from that was that being told that they were wrong didn't punish them, didn't discourage them from that behavior. So use that as evidence to say, oh, we don't learn from negative consequences. We learn from positive consequences, we might say reinforcement, but that we don't learn from punishment. Now, a brief note on this. This idea that we don't learn from punishment continues to persist today. We know from some research that we definitely do learn from punishment, even though Thorndike didn't observe it, but that punishment is more tricky and more difficult to implement than reinforcement. So generally, it's still encouraged to use reinforcement as opposed to punishment, but it is possible to learn from punishment. It does change your behavior. All right. Now, Thorndike also added this idea that we learn by ideas, and he argued that there's a principle of belongingness. We start to recognize, and this is that idea of identical elements. Well, we start to evaluate things and say, oh, these 2 things belong together. And if you perceive 2 things as belonging together, they're more easily learned. Finally, the spread of effect is that reinforcement spreads beyond the current situation. So a student who gets a question right in class is not just reinforced to answer questions, but they pay attention, they listen, they complete their assignments, and it reinforces a whole set of behaviors. So Thorndike's theory, I didn't mention this, but it was called Connectionism. Basically, he argued that learning is about connecting stimuli and responses, that the connections between stimuli and the responses are stamped in because of the satisfying state of affairs that they bring about. They also are influenced by this perception of things going together. And he argued that humans, the way that our behavior is shaped is largely through trial and error. He argued that we're just like animals in that respect. And then he also found that humans respond in given ways because we have a predetermined attitude. I didn't talk about this, but our culture, our background, it prepares us to behave in a certain particular set of ways. So, yeah, what do we now think of Thorndike's theory? Thorndike, he was criticized soon after his work by other behaviors because they argued that he talked about a satisfying state of affairs, he talked about annoying state of affairs, and in scientific circles that isn't all that scientific, and it doesn't. So he was criticized for that. However, he was largely influential because he argued that the effects of our behavior are central to the reasons why we behave that we do. And that idea that the consequences of our behavior shape the way we act is really central to psychology. And although he denied the role of punishment, we do know it can be effective in certain situations. Finally, Thorndike, I didn't talk about it much here, made significant contributions in how do we apply psychological principles, particularly in how do we teach people. And that's where he had that really large influence on, the educational system in terms of how do we help students learn better. All right, last slide. So what were some of those implications for education? So he first off defined and established educational psychology. He popularized the use of tests and statistical methods in education. He argued that we need to have rewards for behaviors. So we need to give students feedback on how are they doing. Seems obvious to us now, but that was the work of Thorndike. He emphasized tailoring rewards and punishments to the situation, and he helped us realize that we need to think about the child's readiness. And lastly, I'll just point out that teachers, he stressed that teachers can facilitate transfer of information by pointing out how different situations are similar. And so we realize that different situations have some similarities to them. And so, for different classes for psychology, we try to help connect them together. So we try to point out that, social psychology can inform cognitive psychology, can inform cultural psychology, and so on. All right, so I think that's good enough for now. In my next video, I'm going to shift over to Clark Hull. I'll talk about him pretty briefly, and then talk about some implications of these ideas. All right.